And welcome back to Frankly Speaking in conjunction with Mehi Rain. Joining me on the line tonight is my good friend, Julien DeMarco. How are you, buddy?
Hello, I'm doing fine.
Thanks for joining me, my friend. Julien, tonight I want to have a discussion about, doctrination, or at least how we kind of view history in a way. And I want to start at the end of World War II. And what I mean by that is that there's something, when I study history, something fundamentally changes after World War II throughout the globe. And I do believe that World War II, and I think we've talked about this, me and you, was purely an ideological war in a lot of ways, right? I don't want to get into the whole Nazi thing, right? We could talk about that later. But my point is this: as an Italian, I can tell you, even more so as a Sicilian, that there was this fundamental shift after World War II in Italy, where Italy went from a very Catholic nation, conservative moral values. I can testify to this personally because my parents were from the old world. My father was born in fascist Italy. My family lived in fascist Italy in that respect, right? And in that sense, when my family came to America, we're very Catholic, we're very conservative, we're very religious in that respect. But something fundamentally changes in Italy to where it goes on liberalism on steroids. But it doesn't happen, Julien, until the imposition of democracy after 1948, after Italy lost the war. And it's interesting to me because with the end of World War II, Italy fundamentally changes, becomes a liberal nation. The Catholicism begins to kind of fade away in many respects. And we got a very liberal nation that was once devoutly Catholic. And as you look around the world, I see many similarities to the situation post-World War II, whether it's Spain, whether it's Austria, whether it's a lot of these other nations at one time Catholic that have fully embraced liberalism and in many ways have gone off the deep end, even surpassing America in its liberalism in a lot of ways. I guess my question for you is, what happened after World War II? Is this shift in sort of political ideology, is it something that I'm imagining here, or do you believe there's some truth to what I'm saying here?
I believe that you're not imagining it. I believe that what you're seeing is exactly what you're describing. It's something that has puzzled me as well, and I think other people. And if you're a person that believes in this right-left paradigm, conservative, liberal, if you breathe that, sleep that, and believe that that's all there is to politics and history, right, left, then you'll miss the whole entire picture. The Second World War and going forward, to where we are now, if you look back, there is a fundamental difference between culture in terms of language, dress, politics, everything. There is this current that it's very hard, I think, to describe or really put your finger on. But the best that I think I can come up with, and what other people can come up with, is this, which I think doesn't really do it justice because it means so many things to so many other people. And I think that's the beauty, not necessarily the beauty, but the insidiousness of liberalism, because it has morphed into so many things that it's really hard to pinpoint its web, the center of its web.
Yes, I agree.
Mm-hmm. And that's what you're seeing. That's what you're trying to describe. From World War II till now, there has been a overdrive of just the rise in all various forms of liberalism that even a century before World War II was completely unimaginable.
Yeah, that's right. Listen, I said before and I say it again, I'm unique in many respects because I am a byproduct of immigration. And I've been raised really in my own kind of dichotomy of sorts. One, this American liberalism, freedom, liberty kind of thing, right? Where liberalism is the champion, is kind of the goodness of our time. It's the greatness that we've achieved. And yet I was also raised in my home with very old world Catholic values, Italian values. And I don't mean old school, I mean old world. And and that kind of a world, when I say old world, it's hard for me to explain oftentimes to a lot of Americans what that actually means. But my point is, I've seen both worlds. I've seen it in my home, and then I've seen it outside my home. And in many respects, that old world came from Italy. And so I haven't been to Italy since 1986, but when I think of Sicily, I think of Catholicism, I think of a conservative culture, rich culture, good foods, good eating. But when you go there now, they've liberalized. And I wonder to myself, how is it that my family escaped with such, I guess, conservative values, if you want to use that left and right economy, and yet that part of the world is so liberal at this point in time? And when did that transformation take place? And again, I've pinpointed to the imposition of democracy in 1948. Because, Julien, as I see it right now, as I said so many times before, I don't know if democracy could actually ever work in a devout Catholic nation. The reason for that is because in Catholic nations, it is God and ultimately the church through sacred tradition and sacred scripture that gives our morality to us, that dictates our morality to us. It's not a personal individual choice like in America. We don't in Catholic nations, we don't determine truth by a show of hands. The church tells us what truth is. And so to impose democracy in a Catholic nation, we've seen the disaster it has become, whether it's Italy, whether it's Spain, whether it's France, go down all the Catholic nations, and conservatives here in America will laugh at the Europeans. Ha, 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 look how liberal they are. We are the true conservatives. America is a conservative nation, is what I was taught when I was in a classical liberal camp. Because we're still religious, we still go to church, right? We don't walk around with thongs on the beach. And yet here we are 20 years later, after those lessons were preached to me, and America's not that far off. My point here is, Julien, there is a liberal nuance of sorts throughout our civilization that I can't quite pinpoint that has brought the West to its knees. And the one thing our classical liberal friends can never admit is that a lot of this has happened under their governorship, under their principles, under their ideological rule, and now they have no way to get the genie back in the bottle as their progressive offspring now dominate every aspect of culture, society, and politics, and we're all standing around looking at each other like, well, what happened to America? What happened to the West, Julien?
Well, what happened to the West is that the West has forgotten itself. It's become it's become neutered, really, emasculated. It has
it forgotten, or have we rewritten history to give us what we want to believe?
Well, I mean, everybody in the West, because historically the West has been majority white. So the West is now racist, white guilt, every other culture is, deserving of its day in the light or day in the spotlight, if you will. But if you're a white person, specifically a white man, no to you. But if you're a person of color, specifically a Muslim woman, then it's great. Only white people have enslaved other people, even though that's not true. Um, you know, it's all of these things. Everything from Christianity is evil to West heroes, either whether it's British heroes like Winston Churchill or even Queen Victoria, or people here in America, if it's Abraham Lincoln. I'm not a big fan of Abraham Lincoln, but I'm just using him as an example for America. His statues are being removed. Literal statues of him freeing a slave are being removed because, it's the current year. And white men bad, it's how fast can we go down the guilt and oppression hole? And
okay, but classical liberals will tell you that the Enlightenment principles were, I guess, the gold standard, right? The founding fathers of America, for example, were the smartest men of their time, and they gave us all of these great values.
Well, what is the gold standard of their time? What are they basing it off of? And they're the smartest men at their time, based on what? Based on what metric? Based on who? Who are they? Who are these founding fathers being compared to?
Well, they would compare it to the old world, the tyranny of the old world, how the peasants were all miserable and suppressed. They weren't allowed to own private property of any kind, right? They didn't have individual rights and certain levels of human dignity. And the founding fathers unleashed the rights of the individual.
Well, no, what are you talking about? Everybody, everybody lived a harsh life. Everybody. So what is this idea that people were not able to own land? I mean, has anybody picked up a history book? I mean, even when the founding fathers made the country, not everybody owned land. They had barriers to entry. Any culture, any country has barriers to entry to owning land. I mean, look at today. I just can't run out and go buy what I want. Even if I had the money to buy it, I would still have to dot all the legalese and go through some bank or whatever, even if I was paying all through cash. So there's always some type of barrier to entry to owning land, and who can own land and why this person can own land. The founding fathers aren't revolutionary in that aspect. Everybody could own land. So again, what are they doing? I really honestly don't know what they're revolutionizing.
Yeah, well, I get it. These are the standard talking points of the classical liberals, that oppression dominated the old world, and now freedom and liberty took off the shackles of that oppression of the old world. And certainly, while the old world was far from perfect, because we have a fallen human nature, the fact is that oftentimes I think classical liberals refuse to look at their own sins or the problems of the civilization they created, because certainly, at the very least, I guess we would have to go back to the dictates and the laws of the old world and compare them to today's world, kind of a thing, right? Which I'm not an expert on. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on. But what I do know for a fact is that culture and family, and again, the one great red herring of the classical liberals, sort of their anti-big government kind of position, have all come to full fruition. I mean, the culture has been devastated, the family is broken, and governments have never been more powerful in the history of the world, including any monarchs of the old world, for that matter, right? Yeah.
big government. So they don't like big government, but they were all for big corporations. Now these big corporations have now said, "See you later. We're going to go
Yeah.
do. We're going to go be all socialist
But that's
and."
fascism now. Fascism has popped up in America, Julian. That's what they will tell you.
Well, most Americans don't know what fascism is.
Agreed.
So that's I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole. I don't I don't deal with I'm not a I guess I don't have the patience to educate people. That's why I'm not a teacher. But I do like pontificating on stuff that I do know about. but but the thing is, the thing is though, I remember growing up, the Republicans were all for small limited government and big business is good. Businesses can, no regulations on business. Business can do what they want because that's how it's supposed to be. If the government is regulating business, then the government's too big. Well, now these big businesses that the likes of Glenn Beck and Sean Hannity and Bill O'Reilly have, worshipped at the altar, have now conspired with people like Charles Schwab and the Joe Bidens and the Obamas and lockstep. And now you have people like Bill O'Reilly and, Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck and Ben Shapiro, looking around. It's just like, I can't do business with almost everything because they're for this, they're for unregulated immigration, they're for LGBT this, they're for, sex reassignment surgery this. And it's just like, well, weren't you the one saying that big business is good? Now look what big business has done.
Yeah. Yeah, listen, I was in the right-wing camp at that time. I remember those arguments very vividly. They were all in favor of the big corporations. Corporations equated the idea of freedom and liberty kind of a thing. Remember, we all went through the McCain-Feingold bill where the right argued that corporations putting as much money as they want into the political system was an act of freedom and liberty, right? Not that I'm a big fan of McCain. I never was a big fan of McCain. But my point on this issue, the right side of a big business. The idea was, Julian, that big business provides goods and services that small business can't. They stimulate the economy, they provide jobs, and they make our lives much more comfort and better and healthier and give us longevity. Corporations are, the saving grace of what makes America great. And then after this last election, there was a wake-up call and there was a shift. And I said it all along, and I'm still saying it today. The right's now using the word fascism. I'm not defending fascism here. I'm just saying the right is using the word fascism, saying, well, this is oligarchical corporatist rule. And my thing is, well, why isn't it just, corporations under classical liberal rule just rose to power? They just consolidated their power. I mean, there's a reason why all the land has been bought up over this course of time. The wealthy are going after the land. Why? Because if you own the land, you own the means of production. You own the means of self-sufficiency. We had this conversation off the air. Look how we're becoming a massive condo society. Why is that? Because if you live in a proverbial apartment, you can never be self-sufficient. You can never be truly free. And yet we've allowed these corporations to go in there, buy up all the homes now and push everybody into condos. And it's going to be a trend that continues, Julie. My point is, you're absolutely right. The right defended corporations. They got caught with their pants down. And now they have to make excuses, concoct excuses like fascism to save their ideological flaws that have led us here, Julian.
Well, I always thought it was funny growing up when I would stumble on to like Bill O'Reilly or Sean Hannity, praising some business or other. And I'm like, that's probably going to come and bite you in the butt. Fast forward to today, I was right.
Yeah. Well, it's It's interesting. That's all. I'm frustrated with the political right. I know the left is absolutely lunatic right now, and I get that. And they're simply taking the concept of liberalism that we always berate and advise people how liberalism starting during the Enlightenment was a flawed ideology. And the progressives are taking liberalism to its most logical conclusion. I know, and again, I know we talked about this before, but I think it's an important point here. I'd like to ask you, Julian. You know, the classical liberals would tell you that they have nothing in relation with with the progressives in America. They're anti-liberalism, right? They're anti-enlightenment is what they would tell you, because they're shutting down the ideals of freedom and liberty and free speech and all these things. And so my question for you again is it fair to throw the progressives and the classical liberals in the same camp?
Yes, because there have been people who have been progressive since the Enlightenment began. There are people who there were people who, at the time of the Enlightenment, were preaching different variations of what we're seeing today, more tame. We would say it was tame, but for their time, it was very radical.
Right.
And so, as I've always come to understand it, which I haven't really figured out how the Enlightenment and thus classical liberalism has become, how it devolved into this idea that there's only two ways of doing politics,
right?
Stagnation or apocalypse. But that's how politics has devolved. Whether you have 2 parties or 100 parties, it always boils down to, if you vote for that guy, the world's going to end. And then the other person is saying, if you vote for that guy, the world's going to end. So it's either if for example, if I vote for Trump, liberals and Democrats are going to say, well, the world's going to end, or we're going to have World War III. Right. Trump's going to go to war with North Korea, which never happened.
Yep.
And, if you vote for Biden, babies are going to die. We're going to get into this war, or this is going to happen, or Biden's going to destroy the economy. And that's what you get from Trump supporters or people who are conservative. Now,
okay, hold on. I'm sorry. Let me just challenge you there. But certainly, there's a difference between the right and the left in regards to governance. And specifically, we've certainly seen an ill effect since Joe Biden came into power versus what we had under Donald Trump. I mean, you look at gas prices, you look at inflation. I mean, the country was managed better under the right-wing candidate versus the left-wing candidate, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not disagreeing. What the point that I was trying to make is that your ideological followers will just automatically, even if something's good, even if a policy by a Republican is good, they will dismiss it out of hand because it's not from their guy.
Yeah,
it's not from their ideological camp. So let's just say we live in a magical world and Biden is still president and he has all the same issues that he has now, but magically somehow we're doing fine. Gas is fine and we don't have all these other problems going on. People on the right will, more than likely, a good deal of them, 90% of them, will still say Biden's doing a bad job, based solely on the fact that he's not a Republican. Just like if when Trump was in office, Trump was doing fine, according to people on the right, or even just people who don't necessarily get into politics, Trump is doing fine. But people on the left or the Democrats don't like Trump because he does mean things. So everything, the world's going to crap because Trump's tweeting something mean, even though Trump is not getting us involved in any world wars, or trying to get a world war going, or gas isn't crazy expensive,
Right.
and isn't all this inflation. But because he's a Republican, Democrats, and because Trump says what he says, Trump is evil and orange man bad, whatever the case may be, because that's the whole point of right, left, democracy, liberalism, what have you. It's all based on demagoguery and ideological adherence. There's no real actual critical thinking involved. If you're a Democrat, if you have a D in front of your name and the person in office has a D in front of their name, you're more than likely to protect them, even though you don't necessarily agree with everything they do, but you're going to say at least he's not the person with the R in front of his name.
Well, I think what the political right would say is that, logic, reason, rationalism is on our side, right? That's why we got to fight and win in the battle arena of ideas. If we fight,
but they're just as demagoguery and ideological as the liberals and the progressives and the radicals.
They can be. I agree. They can be.
Just on a different playing field.
Right. And I agree with you, I guess, because generally I would side with the right more than the lunatic left. I think there's some nuance there, but definitely, it definitely puts us into two massive camps, right? Especially because being on the right, the thing we talked about when I was in the right is the big tent, right? We got to win next election. It's about electoral demographics. How many votes can you take from this demographic and that demographic to get you to the 51%? And that's fine when you're, within the realm of the machinations of politics. But when you take a big tent approach, as we've seen with the Republican Party, you water down your values. That's what happens when you bring in all these different demographics, and then truth becomes very malleable. The left operates different. It takes a bunch of interest groups that it pays off, essentially, is what it does, and brings them in and forces them together, where oftentimes they don't surrender their values in the same kind of way. I mean, take, for example, union workers or government employees that are paid very, very handsomely. Oftentimes, these people overlook the critical moral issues that we're concerned about as Catholics, right? Like abortion, right? A lot of people will either support abortion or not, talk against it, because guess what? They got a nice government job. They're getting paid well. Guess what, Julian? All those employees that work for the government or even union workers, they don't really have to worry about inflation. You know why? Because the government is going to meet the inflation demands of their jobs, right? That's the irony of it all. And a lot of people aren't affected by all of these policies, because the left has put all these coalitions together and they know how to take care of them very well as elections come up. So there is a difference between the left and the right, in a sense that, okay, they're everyday governing principles we got to deal with. But overall, it's a liberal ideology that it just depends on which side of the aisle you fall on. Ultimately, which aisle better affects your needs or your wants in society. If you have a disordered lifestyle, the left accommodates that, right? If you're a private business owner and you don't want to be taxed to death or regulated to death, you fall on the right. But at the end of the day, it's all liberalism.
Yes, that you've answered your own question inadvertently. The thing that makes right people or conservatives or Republican or left people, radicals, progressives, Democrat, whatever, is the fact that both sides believe in universal suffrage.
Yes.
They both believe that voting for your head of state is somehow a God-given right, if they believe in God, which it's not. They both believe that one man, one vote is somehow the greatest thing, the greatest thing since ever, because it's before sliced bread, so it can't really be before sliced bread. But they both believe in that idea that they both believe that a woman should be able to vote. These things are why a conservative or a Republican and a Democrat, leftist, whatever, are essentially the same thing, because neither party doesn't believe that you shouldn't vote for your head of state. Neither party doesn't believe in that not everyone should vote. Now, but you'll say, well, the right believes that legal people should vote. Yeah, but even then, people shouldn't be voting at all. You shouldn't be from your head of state to dog catcher. You believe that everything should be voted on. No, a person that does not adhere to Enlightenment principles doesn't believe, whether you're a legal citizen or not, doesn't believe that everybody should vote. And they also don't believe that women should vote either. That Tom, Dick, and Harry shouldn't be voting. That the head of state shouldn't be a position that is elected. These are things that are not Enlightenment. These are things that are Enlightenment. Now, when you believe that the head of state should be voted on, and when you believe that everybody should be able to vote, including women, okay, so you're an Enlightenment principled person, what have you. But what breaks it down, well, do you believe in abortion? Yes. Okay, so you're on this side of the liberal spectrum. Do you not believe in an abortion? No, I don't believe in it. I do believe in abortion. So you're on this side of the liberal spectrum. But you're both liberal. You're just two different types of liberal.
Right. Well, I think what the political right will say secretly, they won't say this publicly, is that America has fundamentally changed ever since women's suffrage. And especially in a day and age where we have a bunch of screeching liberal, college-educated white women that lead the forefront of every social liberal cause that there is, has become a great concern for many in the political right. But we do have women's suffrage, Julian, and these women are going to show up to the polls. Thus, we can't offend them. All we can do is fight in the battle arena of ideas to change hearts and minds so they vote the right way. We gotta bring them into our camp, Julian. No, we can't go back to the past and change that. That's what the right will tell you.
You know, what's interesting is that I see all these studies and polls, and it shows that if only women could vote, it would be a sea of blue. If only men could vote, it would be a sea of red. Which I don't know. So I do believe that, and I don't believe that. I do believe that if only women could vote, I don't necessarily think it would be a sea of blue, but it would be half a sea of blue, because I don't think women, on average, generally speaking, care about politics. They don't. It doesn't matter how educated, how whatever they are. Most women don't care about politics. It's not in their nature. It's just not something that they do. It's not something that they care about. No amount of social engineering is going to make women care about politics on such a massive scale that if only women could vote, that there'd just be a sea of blue.
Well, I think what's happened is that we've unleashed sort of our fallen nature, and feminism does this really on steroids in the 1960s, and we put women's issue at the forefront, whether it's, again, abortion, whether it's contraception. We gave women a stake in the system via their reproductive system, Julian, right? So now women do care about politics, where before in the old world, listen, you were a wife, you took care of your children, you identified yourself through your husband, but through this concept of liberty, individual rights, the women not wanting to submit to men, now we have to address these reproductive issues, and now women care, Julian.
I think they care, but I don't think they care enough. I think through the propaganda machine that is the talking classes, we are made to think and believe that all these women issues make women care. But I think if you were to actually genuinely poll people, specifically women, the majority of them wouldn't care because it's not in their nature. Because, again, no amount of social engineering is going to change that fact. It's like how, and I'm going to bring it back to the whole men thing, but it's just like how when people, they're always screaming about how there's not enough women in STEM, in the science, technology, and engineering and math. Well, because women, that just even when you do have all these opportunities, even in places like Sweden, where it's like they're literal whole programs, women to be in STEM, there's just not enough women in them because that, again, it's just not something that women want to do en masse. Now, there are some women that excel in STEM, and there are studies that show that women excel in STEM better than men, but that's also, again, it's their nature. It's part of how they were designed. But again, women en masse don't go into STEM because it's not something that interests them. Because it is a field, STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, that is something that interests men. Because it is a masculine field. It is a masculine study. It is something that men like because men and women like different things. Because men and women are different. They are but the same.
I think Dr. Jordan Peterson gives a great example. 99% of bricklayers are men. Why is that? Well, it's a very masculine thing. It's a heavy-duty job, lots of workforce. Women tend to go into industries like teaching. That's not as physically challenged in that sense. And men have always taken up the vast majority of the back-breaking work throughout our civilization, right? Again, it shows that there's fundamental differences. But in a society where we're all free, we're all liberal, and we all have equality now, right? We put together arguments that continue to, again, create disparities that in many respects are natural. Right, Julian?
Yes. It's just like how in this study that if only men could vote, it would be a sea of red.
Yeah.
Now, I believe that sea of red is more likely to pass if men could only vote than a sea of blue if only women could vote. But then again, in society, men have been emasculated and feminized, and they've become soft and they've become weak. So I don't know if it would be all red, but it would definitely be a lot more red than women voting and just being a sea blue.
Well, I think the numbers I've seen, it's single women that will overwhelmingly vote blue. Married women who don't need the government apparatus, have their husbands to depend on, generally vote red, right? So it has to do with the breakdown of the institution of marriage and how marriage is viewed in the West at this point in history. And as we've divorced it from traditional values, ultimately from the sacraments and from the church, marriage has taken a beating in that sense. And that's changed the demographics. And now women are going into a marriage as primary breadwinners. In many cases, they make more money than men now. And that has changed the dynamic of our civilization.
Exactly.
Well too. Yeah.
Well, the thing, they talk about why are marriage rates down. Well, there's a lot of things. It's not this thing or this thing why marriages are down. Yes, divorce. Yes, nobody wants to get married because divorce is so high. Well, nobody wants to, and we've seen nasty divorces, not just on TV, but we have that one friend where the wife's taking the husband to the cleaners. Yes. Or sometimes Not all, but sometimes it's the husband taking the wife to the cleaners.
Right.
But more often than not, it's the wife taking the husband to the cleaners. No man wants to work all his life, get married, and then lose it all to a vindictive woman who he thought loved him and he
Sure.
thought he loved her. But now she's taking him for everything that he has and is being aided and abetted and supported by the government. By men, mind you, men in the government, in the court systems, who they themselves are being beaten over the head by feminism. Because
Okay.
the system is just corrupt. So even if you're a man and you're a judge in the family court system, well, the precedent has already been set. If a woman comes in asking for all these things, the woman should get it.
Yeah.
And the man be damned.
Okay.
So,
Let me point this out to you, and this is a theory that I have, and that is liberalism has been a direct assault on the institution of marriage, or what we consider what the traditional institution of marriage is. When we go from a primarily Catholic religious civilization to one that is more secular, we reject the church, we reject monarchy, we now concoct these liberal republics, and in that respect, we shift away from a more religious society, and we say, well, listen, religion belongs in the private realm, right? You could believe whatever you want, Julian. I could believe whatever I want.
religion has never been private.
I agree with that. I agree with that. But what I'm saying to you is, in America specifically, we've done that, and so
it's impossible to do that. That trying to make religion private is just as fanciful as these liberal utopian republics that republics try and make themselves out to be.
I agree. I agree. But my point is this: once we go from a situation where the state is tied to the faith, right? As historian Charles Cologne has said, I'd rather be ruled by somebody who, again, fears burning in hell rather than, somebody who looks at me and feels that he can milk me like a cow. I'm paraphrasing there. But the moment we come into these liberal democracies, we separate faith. The first thing we see is faith collapse, starting with, again, with this religious liberty in America, all these confused, mashed up, strange denominations within Protestantism. But then, and this is where the classical liberals screwed us up, not so much as the left, but the right, they emphasize economics and materialism, right? If you listen to right-wing talk radio, right, and I did for years, Rush Limbaugh, he preached the idea that we're the greatest nation in the world because we create prosperity, we're free, we have the economic engine of prosperity, we got all these goods and services.
We have internalized and believe in the puritanical work ethic.
Right. But my point here, Julian, is that if all we have now, if the spiritual is cast aside, we personalize it, which effectively means we're not religious anymore. That's what it means. And the only emphasis we have, the greatest achievement that you can accomplish as America is material wealth. How do you tell a woman to stay home and just have babies? How? If the greatest good as an American I can achieve is climb up the economic engine of prosperity and make the money. That's what makes me a great American today. Julia, how do you tell women, sorry, you can't partake of that. You cannot be a great citizen in America because you got to raise babies. You can't. That's why abortion and contraception come around in the 1960s. It goes hand in hand with the apostasy. The moment you have an apostatized society, like we do in America, abortion and contraception are only natural because you made it only about the material aspect, the natural aspect, because you wiped out the supernatural faith. That's what liberalism did, Julian.
Yes. And what's interesting is that if you look at any study between the rise of feminism till now, women as a group, and it doesn't matter if you're a conservative woman, a liberal woman, what have you, everything in between, even if you don't believe in the false right-left economy, women on average, the happiness, their mental health has decreased every single decade as time has gone on since the 1960s. And
right.
it's because women are told that they can have it all, but they can't have it all. You know, women can't have a job, have babies, and do all these things. That's why you see so many women, like Candace Bershaw, I think that's her last name, but her first name is Candace, the author of Sex in the City. She literally came out and was literally about 3-4 years ago talking about how she's alone. She has no husband. Her husband left her. She has no kids, and she lives in this beautiful penthouse apartment, but she's alone. And she's saying she wishes she would have had kids and all these other things, but it's too late for her. But she was told she could have it all. She could have the husband, she could have the dream house and the dream career. And then by all metrics, she did have it all.
Right.
But she lost the husband, she still has the house, and she still has the great career, but she has nobody to keep her home at night, keep her warm at night, and she has no children calling her. Because she was told, and she told herself that she could have it all. And then she told other women that they could have it all. And then she created a whole book series and a whole TV series where 4 women, well, no, yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, yes, 4 women are running around New York City in their 20s and 30s, you know, trying to make it in New York City and having all these wild, disparate sexual relationships. And at the end of it, only 2 of the women have children. One has 1 child, and then the other one has 2 children. And the other one is eventually by the series end, is in their 50s, 60s, has no kids. And then the other one, the main star of the show, Sarah Jessica Parker, ends up marrying her, first love, but he's divorced. He has no children with his first wife. And by the time that they get married by the series end, she's in her 40s, he's in his 50s. And so it's biologically impossible, not necessarily biologically impossible, but she has no kids.
It's a challenge. Yeah.
But all of the ladies in the series are contracepting. And so this is something that was pushed onto women. And so you have a whole generation of women thinking that's how they're supposed to live their life, and then they're ending up in their 40s and 50s, no children,
all alone,
no husband, and all alone.
Well, see, here's the thing, Julian. It's interesting you bring this up, and we'll start to end this podcast here, and this has been a great discussion. But I think what's happened with a lot of women is that a lot of them have accepted this kind of feminist prism, right? I'll go back to the idea. It's a purely materialistic world. Therefore, the highest echelons of American life is to achieve materially what men can achieve, right? Money, power, sex, and it's how women have behaved in comparison to the old world, where there was more of a supernatural element of motherhood, right? Of idealizing, again, the Holy Family and the Holy Mother of God, and a certain role that civilization dictated that raised healthy families. And you wonder why the family has absolutely been decimated in modern civilization. And many women have bought this lie, and many women are paying for this lie. Or like you just said, having no children, being all alone, feeling robbed after following this feminist message. But then, Julian, there's another woman, and I'm in the Midwest, and I can testify this. The woman that never wanted to be in the workforce, the woman that never accepted feminism, but has been forced into the workforce out of necessity. Because guess what? This usury system demands at least 2, if not 3 pretty soon, wage earners in order to keep the lights on and to keep a roof over your head. And I know many women in the Midwest resentful of feminism, but they're at a point in our civilization now, they have no choice. They got to go to work whether they like it or not. And it's either the kids are being dropped off at daycare, or guess what? They're just contracepting because they can't afford to raise a family at this point. Feminism has robbed those women, Julien. Your final thoughts.
I think feminism and liberalism have robbed not just women, but men. It's robbed everybody.
Everybody.
And we are paying the price for our hubris. This idea of one man, one vote, the fact that we can vote for dog catcher to the head of state, and that women should work en masse. All of these things that we think are somehow the greatest thing on earth are in reality our worst enemies. I'm not saying, I'm just going to be honest. I definitely think traditional authority, hierarchical authority, kingship, aristocracy, limited public participation of the populace in government is so much more better than this idea, this free-for-all, that somehow voting is the highest good, and that every man, woman, and child should vote, and every man, woman, and child should be working. That's my final thought.
Spoken like a true monarchist, Julien. There you go, my friend. And what I will add is that, we started this cast talking about post-World War II liberalism, and I think we all see it, sense it, feel it, that something has changed from the old world into the new world. I mean, even in America, I think historian Charles Colomb said it best when he appeared here, and frankly speaking, with me and Julien, where he said, listen, America worked up until the point where Catholics, Protestants, and Jews agreed on some fundamental kind of principles. But as liberalism itself, primarily the idea of religious values, became more and more anarchistic because of the concept of religious liberty, well, guess what? Those differences, or should I say those common values, kind of begin to split apart to where now we don't have any common principles. You combine that with the breakdown of the family, and you see the chaos that the liberal world has created. Listen, you could talk to me about, again, the right to vote and democracy and representative government. That's fine. And we can have a discussion on that. But the one thing you can't deny, if you're a liberal, a classical liberal, is the fact that we have seen the greatest moral collapse in the history of the world under your leadership, under your principles, under your philosophies. The culture is broken, the family has been decimated, and as a result, government has grown and grown and grown and grown and taken power over all of our lives, despite your claims of limited government. And the reason why that has happened is because you've divorced the moral law from, guess what, the governing body of political philosophy. You individualize everything. You do you, I do me, and as long as we don't, cross each other's property lines, we don't shoot each other. One of the greatest fallacies ever created by classical liberal post-Enlightenment thinkers. It has brought the West to its knees, and the great moral demise of the West under the tutelage of classical liberals is evident for everybody to witness at this point, and you can't make up excuses like fascism to justify it at this point. I'm sorry, I'm not buying that. This is liberal civilization collapsing before our very eyes. Julien, my friend, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
All righty then, this is Frank signing off for Frankly Speaking in conjunction with May Rain. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.